You might already be taking steps to look after your physical health, whether it's through a combination of diet, exercise, going to the gym, whatever it might be. But do you look after your mental health in the same way? That's what we discuss in this week's episode. I'm Jeremy Klein, and this is Change Work Life. Hello and welcome to the Change Work Life podcast, the show that's all about beating the Sunday evening blues and enjoying Mondays again. My guest this time is Mio Yokoi, who is a psychotherapist and also the host of the Life Stuff 101 podcast. Originally I wanted Mio on to talk about mental health at the workplace, but as you'll hear, the conversation quickly broadened to how we look after our mental health more generally. Do make sure you listen to the end because Mio's got some great tips and practices which you can easily incorporate into your daily life to look after your mental health. Here's the interview with Mio Yokoi. Hi Mio, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for having me.
Mio, can you start by introducing yourself and telling us a bit about what it is that you do?
Sure. My name is Mio Yokoi, and I work as a registered psychotherapist in private practice in Toronto, Canada. Have been doing so for the last 10 years. And well, it's not currently a part of quote unquote making a living. I also host a podcast called Life Stuff 101. And the idea is to inspire people to think about the importance of mental health in the same ways that we think about the importance of physical health. And my goal through all of my efforts, but the podcast is one of the sort of the launching points for that, is to inspire 126 million people to think about their mental health needs differently because the way that I imagine it, the more people are intentional and cognizant about their mental health needs, I just think that it'll just make for a better world.
I wanted to ask you, how did you get to the figure of 126 million?
Yeah, it's very specific, right? I was born in Japan and I'm a first-generation immigrant to Canada. That is actually the population of Japan. So I was thinking about how interesting if it would be for a whole country of people who prioritize their mental health in the same ways that they do their other kinds of health and what that would mean to the quality of life for a country.
Okay, excellent. You mentioned that you'd been practicing psychotherapy for 10 years. What was it you were doing before then?
So this is going to be actually quite interesting. And I was preparing to speak to Jeremy today. I actually did think back to all the different ways in which different career changes that I've made over my lifetime. So as I mentioned, I have been in private practice now for over 10 years. And I'd actually, thinking back, had made quite a few big career shifts over my lifetime. When I'd been much, much younger, I wanted to be a journalist and I pursued that into university, but I quickly learned that it wasn't going to be something that I was going to be able to devote my life to. While I was in the process of figuring things out, I worked in a restaurant and served, which is a very valuable experience for me. And I think actually could be a really useful thing for many people, especially younger folks, to have. I come from a family of parents who are skilled and experienced in the art of hospitality. So I also take the work of providing good service and doing hospitality, quote unquote, right, very seriously. But it was a very valuable experience for me. And from there, I worked in an administration capacity at a music video production company. Now we're going back a bunch of years, right, where like music videos were still relevant, I guess. And then found my way into marketing and eventually to marketing at a startup tech company in the 90s before the tech bubble burst here. And then I ended up working in a more traditional boutique marketing firm. If you kind of follow all of that, I guess, you could say that my career choices and changes were somewhat organic and I made decisions based on sort of the opportunities were available to me. But having ended up working in marketing as long as I had, it was actually a pretty big change I decided to make by pursuing to work as a psychotherapist here where I live in Canada.
And what was it that sort of sparked the desire to change from marketing to psychotherapy?
Just to give you a sense of the chronology, I guess, all that stuff that I mentioned up until now, that was about 15 years of my working life. And there was a point in my marketing career where I realized that there was a lot of stress and time that was devoted to doing things that ultimately didn't matter. So for instance, I'd be working on a marketing campaign and I worked as a project lead on, for instance, biweekly or monthly flyers for some larger retailers here in Canada. And there'd be so much pressure and sometimes really unnecessary, like time stressors and things like that, and be so intense. But once the flyers would all be delivered, it was as if nothing happened. And apart from stores and those companies, hopefully making sales from those flyers, and the company I worked for, who were able to continue the contract so that I would continue to be paid. Looking at the bigger picture, these things weren't enough for it to be meaningful. And so all the stress and all this pressure and all this resource and all the care that I was putting into these kinds of projects, I would step back and think, it doesn't ultimately have meaning for me. And then that's what sort of got me to start looking at myself and wondering like, what would be that thing?
And so what led you specifically out of that to psychotherapy?
There's a number of things, but I think that when I started to realize that just making a certain salary and being able to live a certain lifestyle wasn't fulfilling enough for me. Like, it's just a very interesting thing, right? That growing up, whether it's family or whether it's sort of like the outside world, in my case, like my family didn't necessarily have this kind of a narrative, but you kind of see outside of yourself. And especially I live in a place like Toronto where people are very much like status oriented and they're like, you want to have a certain kind of salary and you want to live in a certain place and you want to be able to live a certain kind of lifestyle. When I realized that those things didn't fulfill me, I just started looking for like an answer or just ways of trying to resolve this conflict that I had internally. I guess one specific thing, and this is true to this day, which has made and still makes a significant difference, is deciding to engage in psychotherapy. Like, because I had this sense of like not knowing, and I figured, well, maybe somebody who was outside of me, somebody who could, quote unquote, maybe give me some objective feedback, but would maybe provide me with an answer or a sense of a different way of thinking and feeling about things. And I was very lucky to find a therapist who's been an incredible fit for me. And just working with her, like all these years, I still do, has allowed me to keep growing and evolving in all areas of my life.
It was working with someone else who was a practicing psychotherapist that made you think, you know what? I'm getting something out of this. This is something that I'd like to do myself as well and help other people in the same way.
Well, that's certainly it. I mean, for what was able to gain and how much I felt that I was able to change and to evolve and to grow from my experience, I wanted to pay it forward. I knew that if I was feeling that way, my sense was that there were others who were feeling similarly to me. And if there are ways in which I could support other people to have a better way of being or to feel differently or to feel as though they have different choices or not feel stuck, then I felt like that would be work that would be more meaningful for me.
Fantastic. And just talk us briefly as to how that's then led you on to starting the podcast.
So initially, I was very content or fine with, or just thought that I would work one-on-one with folks. I didn't really want to do family therapy, didn't necessarily want to do couples therapy. Just where I found my groove, I guess, or my niche is in working with adult individuals. And as much as that work is so, like, I feel so privileged to be able to do that work, that people are open and that they share their lives with me and that they want to work with me. And that is still true to this day. Like, I feel very much that way. I'm so grateful. But over time, we also realize, people come to therapy when they're kind of like they're most distressed, or when they're often at a place where they don't have a sense of where else to turn. I started to was a thought that kept kind of germinating over time of like, what if it is that we thought about mental health from the perspective of, if we were to take care of ourselves, just like we do our physical health on an ongoing basis, that when something does happen, because inevitably it does, we'll be in a more strengthened or a more resilient position to be able to manage these either like hiccups or curveballs, or sometimes, the car crashes that can happen in our lives, like metaphorically and also literally. And so it's from that feeling and that belief of, what if I can be a part of that conversation for people to think about mental health differently, that the podcast was born.
Fantastic. That sounds brilliant. One of the reasons I wanted to specifically invite you onto the podcast was to talk about mental health in the workplace, which now I say it sounds like it could be a huge topic and we could probably do an entire series on it. But maybe we can just sort of do a bit of an introduction and some tips into the whole idea and the concept here. I guess one of the reasons I was interested to talk about this is one of the comments that I sometimes see on sort of careers discussion boards and that sort of thing is, I don't necessarily want to do a job that I particularly like. I just want to do something that I can put up with. I don't mind being bored. I don't mind if my colleagues are a bit, not great. I just want something, easy that I can just get by on. My instinctive internal reaction to that sort of thing is, that can't be a good idea because you're just going to grind yourself down with this mediocre. And to me, it just sounds like that's almost asking for trouble when it comes to mental health. Now, I'm not a trained psychotherapist, so I'm hoping that either you're going to tell me, yeah, you're right, that it is going to be a problem, or you're going to shoot me down and tell me that I'm wrong and you're going to give me good reasons for that.
I'll give you a different kind of an answer. People come across those kinds of answers or that kind of statement. You think, okay, there is a hope or a wish that this person has. And this reaction is maybe coming a contrast of like where they are currently, or something like that. It's a hope that if only I were able to be in a situation where it didn't cause me too much distress, but it's something that I would be able to manage over time, that should be fine. The reality is there are some folks who are okay with that. For those folks, then that's really great to be able to find those kinds of working situations for them. But that's not true of everybody. And for those folks who do find that they're looking for something that is more fulfilling for them work-wise, because work for a lot of people have a lot of personal meaning, a lot of personal value. And if it's something that is important to some people, that they have a more ideal working situation that works best for them, and that's also going to be a part of their overall fulfillment, then if someone like that is saying that kind of a comment, it could be that they're A, in denial, or B, that the grass seems greener on the other side, right? Like that we often will want something other than what we currently have if something that we currently have isn't working for us. But I know that this is a bit of a jumbled answer, but there are people who are perfectly fine to just have a situation where they just go in and just kind of put up with whatever it is, their circumstances, and just be able to go home and have sort of a life outside of that that's maybe fulfilling for them. For some people, it's just like the routine. This is fine. Like I don't want to have any more than this or don't need any more than this. But then there are other individuals who are very different from that, especially to the audience that you speak to, Jeremy, that maybe is more of the folks, right? That your audience is more the people who are like, oh, like something doesn't feel quite right. And I don't know what ways to manage that or how to move towards something else.
One of the things I see with that kind of approach is a sort of a risk of kind of believing that mediocre is all that's available. The kind of work is always going to be work mentality. It's not possible really to enjoy yourself at work. And so I guess if people are coming from a bad place, be it something like they have terrible relationships with work, or they just really don't enjoy their job, people kind of want to look for an escape. And because they have such a sort of like a damaged perception about work, they kind of just think, I'm just going to shoot for mediocrity. And is that right? Is that the way that some people approach it? And how can people make sure that they're going for what they want to do and what they're capable of, rather than just going for, like a mediocre escape route?
That's a very multi-layered question in the way that I hear it anyway. And that one is, I don't like to think in absolutes And one of the things that I learned through my experience and work, and working with so many people, and also with my own work over time, there's a judgment there, right, about mediocrity. And perhaps it could be that you and I might look at like someone's situation, and we might be listening to someone's perspective on their working life and think, oh, this person is settling for mediocrity, like quote unquote. But that is a judgment that maybe we're placing, or I may be placing, on this particular person's experience. There are some people who would be able to name, it's like, well, this is all I can do. This is all that's available to me. And so therefore, this is what I've got to figure out how to put up with. If I'm hearing something like that, then I would think, oh, this person wants something different. This person isn't content or feels as though there is something that's possible, that's outside, or they would like something to be possible outside of their current reality. Whereas there are some people who talk about their working lives in such a way where maybe from my perspective, I'd be maybe feeling like, oh, like that's not something that would necessarily work for me. Often there are a lot of people who are not in their mind settling. Like it's just something that for them, it's just, okay, like this is what works for me. So I think that first of all, there is sort of making that the distinction between the people who are feeling like, oh, like I don't know that anything else is available for me, to have that awareness of themselves, versus folks who are like, nope, this is fine. Like I'm content. Maybe there's other things out there for me. I'm not really that driven, or it doesn't bother me so much to think about the fact that it could be different.
I love the fact that you're talking about self-awareness there, actually. And I think that's completely right about the distinction. I'm certainly in no way saying that everyone settles, or that someone may judge mediocre is not what the person who's actually doing it judges it. And frankly, it's the only person who matters is the person who is doing the job and whether or not they gain satisfaction. So I think that what you said about self-awareness is absolutely the key point here. And I just wonder, what steps can people take to develop their self-awareness around this sort of thing, so that they can start perhaps to, I was going to say challenge, but perhaps question their own internal narrative and determine whether they do fall in the category of, yes, actually, I really am happy doing this, or that they are in the category of, I might say that I'm happy with this, but reality is that I'm settling, and in fact, I'm one of these people who needs something different. How does someone take steps to make themselves more aware of where they sit?
Such a fascinating question. And and I think if I had an answer to that, honestly, I could become one of the self-improvement gurus who would be like, I have the answer, to be able to tell you like how to be more self-aware. I think that it's such like a complicated and multi-layered question, because again, like some people just are innately like that, have that sense of curiosity, or innately thinking about themselves from the standpoint of, something is unsettled in me. I just have this desire for things to be different. Or sometimes what it can happen is for loved ones, like trusted ones around you, for that individual to say, like you've been really cranky, or you used to be more of a happy-go-lucky type of person who would be open and spontaneous and connected, and all these other kinds of more positive ways of being. And it doesn't seem like that is who you are anymore. What's happened? I mean, that's a big one. And if someone is able to take that kind of feedback on board to say, okay, I feel this way in which I don't feel as maybe that sense of vitality that I used to have at a different time in my life before I started down this career path, before I started this particular job. And to have somebody, maybe other people say like, you've been different for the last little while. And if people begin to kind of put those things together and say, do I want to be curious about this? Do I want to think about ways in which, like, what does this even mean for me? The fact that I feel this way and then I'm getting this kind of feedback, or that my life feels differently than I remember it feeling at a different time in my life. Having a curiosity, and for somebody to want to have that curiosity about themselves, is really the first step to creating or cultivating self-awareness. And sometimes it can happen also situationally, like certain things like a relationship breaking up, or, a big life event happening, or even like losing a job or starting a new job. Like all these kinds of things can sometimes really get people to a place of, why am I feeling not great about this? Like, why is it that there are a lot of big feelings in relation to this thing that's happened? That can also be an entry point. I think there are so many different entry points, but at the end of the day, it has to be that certain individual who decides that it's possible for something to be different, or to be curious about why it is that that's what they're experiencing, or that they found themselves in a place in life that they didn't necessarily expect to be.
Okay. And once someone has got curious, do you, with anyone that you work with, do you have a sort of a framework or a practice that people can use to help themselves with their curiosity? So they start off with, I am curious, but they're not necessarily sure what questions to ask themselves.
Like I mentioned, what I found over time in my psychotherapy practice is that there are some people, there's a very smaller minority of people who may start therapy or pursue therapy because they are curious. Most people start therapy because they're in distress. And when they are in a state of distress, they're trying to solve a problem, which is a very different approach. And sometimes there are people who come in and they're curious about, it's like, why, have I followed all the things that I was supposed to do in life? And I'm at this place where I'm just not happy. And so in some ways, like very similar to how maybe where I started from. But I also had a level of distress, I think, at that time as well. I think that it's a very multi-layered thing. I think that it really helps that there's much more conversation globally about, as much as people sort of misalign this idea of self-help, but that people are curious about themselves, So I think generally speaking, the entry point might be something like YouTube videos or articles online, or through doing Google searches because they just have a curiosity about something. It's, like, I'm not exactly answering your question, I understand, but I think that what does happen for most folks is that the entry point is often when they have a curiosity, they go to maybe social media or online, or do a Google search or YouTube or something like that, which then maybe leads to books and things like that. And then eventually it could be that they come in and they're like, oh, I just need, a coach or a different perspective or something like that, which then provides almost like a playground. So the way that I work anyway, like I'm a psychodynamic therapist, what I do is to say, all right, so where are you at and what's going on for you? And let's really lay down. So I'm quite visual in terms of the way that I work. I think of things as like maybe a lot of people are coming in as sort of like a crumpled up map, right? Like that there are so many different places and areas of their lives, but it's all sort of like crumpled up into one. It's difficult to know what's what. And what can happen in therapy, and I think of therapy as a resource, is to help my clients open that map up and smooth that map out, and to be able to see like where the different places are and what areas need more work or attention or clarity. The way in which I work is to figure out what they want the map to ultimately look like, and where are the areas that they have passion for, or what areas that they would like to visit or to be a part of or to live even. And that's actually a very different process for every person that I work with.
I really like that sort of visual analogy of smoothing out the map. I can really see that. You mentioned at the start of the episode, your podcast is about kind of getting people to be aware of mental health in the same way that they're aware of physical health before the distress happens. So if I want to find out about physical things I can do, I can go and look online at all sorts of different exercises I can do and all that sort of thing. In terms of mental health, now I'm sure the answer to this is let's go and have a look at your podcast because you cover all of this in a lot more detail. But are there any particular practices which are kind of low barrier to entry? You can start these with a few minutes and without doing any massive sort of preparation or anything like that. Just maybe one of two things that anyone can start, which will over time have an impact and help their general mental well-being.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good question, in that to first figure out what the entry point is. One of the things that I'm still, I think, trying to get my head around with my podcast is the way that I think about it. I think about it as, if I talk about a lot of different ways and insights and people's experiences, perhaps something will resonate with that particular individual. And that could be the entry point. But that said, it can also be really helpful to get very specific about what those entry points could be as well. I think one of the things that is much more openly discussed and accepted at this point is meditation, mindfulness meditation, mindfulness practices. And because with apps and technology, it's certainly more of an easier, there's less of a barrier to entry, because something like the two apps that I often talk about, one is called Headspace, and it's great. And it's from a guy that's based in the UK, and his accent and the way in which he speaks, I think is really, at least resonates with me, and the people that I have suggested it to, like, pretty unanimously have gotten very good feedback about it. And with Headspace, if I haven't checked it out very recently, but there is a 10-day trial, at least they used to be. And you can, if it works for some people, they can just play the 10-day, 10-minute trial program over and over and over again. And what I've also found with a lot of folks is that they might do it 3 or 4 times, maybe even like over like 6-month period, and realize, you know what, I'm ready to go to the next steps with the meditation. So as human beings, what's really phenomenal about who we are is that we're always, I think, looking to strive in some way. So to have that entry point is very important. So whether it's an app like Headspace, or another one is, there's a guy named Dan Harris, and he has Waking Up is also an app. And his app is a little bit more expensive, I think, when it comes right down to it. But the ways in which he talks about meditation is a lot more nuanced. And it's something like, is if you're happen to be a little bit more cerebral, it might be something that might resonate for you more. But then if we were to put that aside for a moment, it could be a second thing to potentially consider is there's something called the 5-minute journal. The 5-minute journal is really fantastic. 5 minutes of your time in the morning and in the evening, and it asks you questions or prompts, and you do it every day. And again, like, it provides you with an opportunity to just be mindful about your day, maybe to write down the things that you're grateful for, the things that you would like to maybe do action wise, and so forth. And it just kind of keeps you mindful of the different things that are going on. And I think that for a lot of people to get into that practice would be really helpful as well. In terms of like the lowest barrier to entry, I would say just going out for a walk 10 minutes a day. And it's often, I think, you can do it alone or, with a trusted person, but just to get yourself moving. And I guess this is also, kind of dovetails like this idea that, like, physical health and mental health is like very well a connected thing. But even going out for 10 minutes and just going for a stroll and just thinking about your day, just reflecting on your day, and just giving yourself that time and space to just slow down and not have some kind of electronic device or to be thinking about your next thing or whatever it is, it allows for the brain to just chill out for a little bit, which can actually be really helpful for mental health.
One of the things I find when I'm walking, I mean, this might just be me, but hey, it's my podcast. I'll ask what I want. Most of the time when I'm walking, I'm actually listening to podcasts. So it's a time when I use it to do sort of like education and that sort of thing. When I'm not doing that, I sometimes find that I end up kind of getting gnarled up in my own thoughts whilst I'm walking. Is there like a sort of, have you ever come across any kind of like meditative practice whilst walking that kind of forces you just to focus on what you're doing and not start thinking or particularly worrying about all the other things which can go through your head when you've not got something else going in there, like a podcast or music or whatever?
So I don't have something specific in mind, but my understanding is that there are also apps that have walking meditation programs. So something that like that could potentially help. Like if you are listening to somebody guiding you through that walk so that it's focusing your attention on that particular prompt or that particular guidance that you're getting from the app. Another potential thing to consider is that as much as we like to think of ourselves as multitaskers, our brain actually really likes to focus on one thing at a time. So if it is that you're looking to maybe just have like a 10-minute walk where you're just wanting to not find yourself spiraling or not like cycling, like thought cycling, that kind of thing. There are certain things like music that could be like more ambient music that isn't necessarily have a harmony or lyrics and things like that that you can focus your mind on. That there is actually, this is interesting, there is this song called Weightless, which is a song that was developed or written specifically to help calm. They made the song along with this band that is meant to be the calmest song that's ever been created. And it's called Weightless, and it's by a band called Marconi Union, I want to say. And it's available. I think someone told me it's on Spotify, and I know it's on Apple Music, like that kind of thing, where you can just have that on and you'll just notice that it allows you to just have that be sort of the ambient presence in your head for those few minutes. And for me, actually, I use that particular piece of music if I'm trying to write or if I'm trying to focus on a very specific thing. And that I find that it kind of keeps the other stuff away, keeps the other thoughts or, whatever else might be distracting me. That's one possible thing to consider.
I will have to check that out. Mio, this has been a really fascinating conversation. Where can people go to find out more about you and what you're doing and your podcast?
First of all, Jeremy, thank you, because I felt like we had a really great conversation today as well. So thank you very much. At this point, the best place to find me is lifestuff101.com. One of the things that I'm in the process of pivoting toward in my private practice is to be working more with folks who have and possess sensory processing sensitivity, or some people know that as being highly sensitive. And that's something that I will be doing more work on. And there'll be some information about that on my podcast, but there'll be maybe more information about that in the future. But all of that you can find at lifestuff101.com, which is the name of my podcast as well.
Fantastic. I will put a link to that in my show notes. Mio, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Jeremy. It was great.
Thanks. Bye-bye. As I've interviewed more people, there's been some interesting patterns emerging. One of them is the fact that people often seem to end up changing into a career where it's something which has helped them in the past. So, for example, Mio needed some help in the psychotherapy space. She got that help and then decided that that's what she wanted to do. We also had Michelle Smith back in episode, I can't remember what it is, but I'll link to it in the show notes, where she was looking for a solution to Pilates. Adrian Muxlow, also our hypnotherapist, who used hypnotherapy to help him give up smoking and then decided to become a hypnotherapist himself. I guess it goes to show that experience matters. And what I mean by that is that you just don't know whether or not you're likely to enjoy something unless and until you've had experience of it. Now, it's almost impossible to get experience of everything, but it definitely does show that it's worth having an open mind and trying to experience as many things as possible. All that aside, I really love the fact that Mio is talking about taking steps before there's a problem. She mentioned that people go and see a psychotherapist or a counsellor because there is a problem and they need help dealing with it. Whereas what she's talking about is taking steps to maintain mental health in the same way that we take steps to maintain physical health. So in other words, we do exercises in order to avoid problems coming along down the road. She also gave us some ideas as to what you might do. There was the example of meditation, journaling, or even just walking. And I guess it's a question of finding which one's right for you and which one you can easily build into your daily life. Really, the only one which I do routinely is walking. I've had a go at meditation, did it for a couple of weeks, haven't really tried journaling. It's something, I think definitely meditation is something I'd like to get back into, but it's creating the habit, and I think that is key really to any of these practices, is building in a habit, and I think that's something I'm definitely going to cover in a future podcast episode. You'll find the link to Mio's podcast and all the other things we talked about on the website. That's at changeworklife.com/3131 for this episode. And I'd really love to hear from you, and you can get in touch in two ways. First of all, there's the Change Work Life Facebook group. So if you go to changeworklife.com/Facebook, then that'll take you there. You can leave any messages, comments, queries there, ideas for future episodes. I'd love to hear what ideas you've got. Or alternatively, there's the contact page, which is at changeworklife.com/contact. Again, if you've got ideas for episodes or feedback on what episodes you've enjoyed in particular, I'd really love to hear from you, because this show's for you and it's your views that are going to guide who I'm going to be interviewing. So please do get in contact. There's more to come with another great interview next week, and I can't wait to see you then. Cheers. Bye.